Okay, so now we're going to go over our Chapter 5 chapter review on page 220. And for this, I'm not going to write it on the board. I'm just going to talk about it, okay? So let's start with number 1. A group of organisms of the same kind living in an area is a blank. So if I go back and look at my definitions or look at my vocabulary, I should know that that should be population. So number 1 is population. Okay, number 2, how do the fins of a sunfish help it survive in water? So if I think about what the question's asking me, it says, how do the fins of a sunfish help it survive in water? If I think about fins, I know that a fin is the part of the fish that helps it swim. It's the little part of the body that lets it move and go around the ocean. So that is how the fins would help the sunfish survive, because the fins let it go get its food, let it go to different parts of the ocean, let it get away or swim away from predators. So that's how the fins would help the sunfish survive. Number 3, what makes up an ecosystem? So for that, I would simply go back to my definition or go back in my book to look at my vocabulary, and we know that an ecosystem is just where living and non-living things live and interact with each other. Okay, so number 4, people build roads in new areas. How does this activity affect the living things in that environment? Okay, so when we think of new roads and living things, we know that us people, we're living things. We know that the animals and the trees, they're living things. So let's think about that. First, let's talk about people. So when other people put down roads or they pave roads, what do we use roads for? Well, we use them to drive on and to get to other places. So that's how it affects us, because we can get from one place to another by the roads. Now, for animals and trees and other plants, this affects them in a different way, because when we pave a road, we have to make way for the road, and so some trees are getting cut down, some plants are getting destroyed, or some animals have to move to a different area to live. So sometimes it has more of a negative effect on the plants and the animals for roads, but for us it has more of a positive effect because we get to go from one place to another quicker and easier. So now let's look at number 5. Classify the following resources as renewable or non-renewable resources. So first let's talk about renewable resources. So we know a renewable resource is a resource that can be replaced as fast as they are used. And so some of the resources that were given to me or given to us in the book for renewable would be water, solar energy, and wind. So those don't get used up as fast. So that's why they would be renewable. And then for our non-renewable section, we know that non-renewable resources are resources that exist in limited amounts and are used faster than they are replaced. And so some examples of that would be your petroleum, which is oil, your minerals, and your soil, because they don't get replaced as fast as they get used. So that's why those would be classified as renewable and non-renewable. All right, let's look at number 6. Tell how this mold fossil of an ammonite may have formed. So first let's look at the picture, and we need to classify what type of fossil this is. And we know back from our book that this type of fossil is a mold fossil. And so this fossil actually has basically the imprint of the fossil on it. It's not technically the exact fossil. It just has the imprint of where the fossil was. So if we think back to this type of fossil and this ammonite from our picture, we can maybe think that the ammonite had died, and over time the body of the ammonite started to decay or go away, but it was imprinted into the sediment that it was in, and and so it left an imprint of where it was laying, or that fossil of how it was back then. So that's kind of how we can figure out how it was formed. Okay, note number 7, horseshoe crabs are called living fossils because they have changed little in 300 million years. How do paleontologists know this? So if we think back, we have the horseshoe crabs from way back then, and then we have horseshoe crabs now. So what they would do is they would compare the two. You would look back to your fossils that you would dig up or you would find, and you would compare them to the fossils we have, or the horseshoe crabs we have today. And you like dissect, well, not really dissect it, but kind of analyze the fossils, figure out what differences they have, what similarities they have. And so that's how they would do that. They would simply just take the old fossils and the horseshoe crabs we have today and look at them and compare them side by side. Okay, and then last question, number 8. It says, think about an ecosystem near where you live. How do the organisms there interact? So for me and for most of us, especially for me, I live out in the country, so I see a lot more like animals, I guess you would say, besides like cat and dogs. And then around here we see a lot of squirrels running up the trees, running out in the street. We see squirrels. We have a lot of different plants and crops around here, living in the Delta. And so we have plant squirrels. For me, since I live out in the country, I don't know, some of you might have seen these around your neighborhood, I don't know, but I like see foxes sometimes. There was actually a fox in my driveway a couple years ago that was just hanging out, and it really freaked me out. But yeah, so I would see, like, we see plants, squirrels, foxes, but how they would interact would be, we have the plants, well, the squirrels eat the plants, so that's how they would interact with each other. And then sadly, the foxes actually eat squirrels. So the foxes interact with the squirrels by eating them, which is really sad. But that's how all of this would interact together around here, and in a lot of other places in the South, that's how they would interact with one another. It would be different if we lived in a city, but that's how, being more in the South and around a rural area, it is. So that's all of your questions. I hope I cleared some things up if you weren't really sure about an answer. Okay, but if you have any questions, just let me know.